My stepdad said I'd never amount to anything. Today I called him into HR. My stepfather Richard sat across from me in the conference room, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and disbelief as he processed that the anonymous buyer who'd purchased his trucking company was his worthless dropout stepdaughter. This is a mistake, he said, voice shaking as he looked at the termination letter in front of him, his name typed neatly at the top. 20 years ago, Richard married my mother when I was 8. He immediately made it clear I was baggage from her previous marriage, a burden he'd graciously accepted. He had his own son, Bradley, who was somehow destined for greatness, despite being dumber than a box of rocks. Richard owned a small trucking company, 12 trucks he'd inherited from his father. He never let anyone forget he was a self-made businessman, though self-made apparently meant inheriting everything and running it into the ground slowly. When I was 16, I asked if I could work dispatch after school. This is a man's business, he'd said. Besides, you're not smart enough. Stick to waitressing. When I got accepted to college for business management, he laughed. Waste of money. You'll be pregnant and drop out within a year. He paid for Bradley's tuition at an expensive private school where he failed out after 3 semesters. When I graduated summa cum laude, Richard didn't come. Had a big contract meeting, he told Mom. He was at the bar. I knew because Bradley posted pictures on Instagram. I started working for a logistics company after college. Learned everything about the trucking industry. Richard loved telling anyone who'd listen that I was a secretary at some office, even though I was running operations for a fleet of 300 trucks within 2 years. When I started my own logistics consulting firm, Richard told the entire family at Christmas that I was playing businesswoman and would come begging for money within 6 months. I didn't beg. I built. 5 years later, I had 40 employees and contracts with major retailers. Richard's company was bleeding money. He'd refused to modernize, update his fleet, or use any technology newer than a fax machine. His drivers were leaving for companies that paid on time and maintained their vehicles. That's when Richard started looking for a buyer. He was desperate but trying to hide it. Posted the listing through a broker, asking 3 times what the company was worth. I made an offer through a shell company. Lower than asking, but more than he'd get from anyone else. Richard jumped at it, bragging to everyone about the Silicon Valley investors who recognized his company's value. The sale went through last Monday. Richard stayed on as an advisor per the contract, assuming he'd teach the new owners how to run his business. He spent the week strutting around, telling drivers not to worry, that he'd make sure these tech kids didn't ruin everything. Today was the meeting where he'd meet the new owner. Hi, Richard, I said, walking in with my lawyer and HR representative. He laughed. Actually laughed. What are you doing here? I'm meeting with the owners. You are. The laugh died. What? I slid the ownership papers across the table. My name, my signature, my company logo. This is illegal. You can't. You tricked me. I bought your failing company at above market value. How is that illegal? I never would have sold to you. I know. That's why I used a shell company. Completely legal. He stood up, face red. I'll sue. For what? Buying your company? Paying you more than it's worth? Check the contract, Richard. It's ironclad. My lawyer spoke up. Mr. Paulson, we're here to inform you that your advisory position has been terminated, effective immediately. You can't fire me. I have a contract, which allows termination for cause. We've documented 16 safety violations, 4 cases of wage theft, and 3 instances of tax fraud in just our first week's audit. Richard went pale. The tax fraud was news to him that we'd found it, not that he'd done it. If you leave quietly, I continued, we won't pursue charges. If you fight this, we turn everything over to the authorities. Your mother will never forgive you. Mom divorced you 6 months ago. You were too busy drowning in debt to notice she'd moved out. She's the one who told me you were selling. That broke him. He slumped in his chair. Bradley needs this job, he whispered. His son, now 35, was dispatch manager despite never dispatching a truck successfully in his life. Bradley's already been terminated. Turns out he was selling fuel meant for the trucks and pocketing the money. We have him on camera. You've ruined my family. No, Richard. You ruined your company by being too proud to adapt, too stubborn to learn, and too stupid to realize that the stepdaughter you dismissed was watching and learning everything not to do. I stood up. Security will escort you out. Your final check will be mailed, minus what you stole over the years. As security led him away, Richard turned back. I gave you a roof over your head. Mom paid the mortgage. You contributed nothing but criticism and emotional abuse. Now you can contribute nothing somewhere else. The drivers cheered when he left. They'd hated him for years but needed the jobs. I gave them all raises with their next checks, updated the fleet, and implemented the technology Richard had refused to consider.